Welcome to KW Conversations, where we discuss the workforce and education issues that matter in the Louisville region. This show is brought to you by KentuckianaWorks, the region's Workforce Development Board.
All right. Hello, my name is Mike Karman, and I'm a Sector Strategies Coordinator at KentuckianaWorks, and I am speaking with Aleece Smith, who is also employed at KentuckianaWorks. Aleece, tell me what your role is at KentuckianaWorks.
Yeah, so I do a lot of our employer-facing work, or I should say, setting strategy for a lot of our employer-facing work. So that's both through our service providers who provide direct services in workforce, both to job seekers and employers, as well as having the opportunity to go after like fun little grants that allow us to work a little bit more closely with employers on a variety of different topics.
Awesome. Well, of course, I'm very familiar with the RJRW grant, which is Redesigned Jobs Resilient Workers. That's funding that comes to us from the National Fund. How would you say the work we're doing there, how does that differ from more typical or traditional workforce development work?
Well, I think if you consider the workforce system, a lot of people recognize that we have job-seeking customers. And that's probably by design. That's where a lot of the funding goes to training dollars and other kinds of activities that help a job seeker become more work ready, right? We do have another customer, and that is the employer. If you think about it as, the labor market, you have the labor providers who are the job seekers and the labor buyers who are the employers. So if we're thinking, okay, how do we really dig in on this employer side of the relationship? It's not going to be our place to train employers because of the variety of industry that's out there, and doing the work is going to make them more expert at it than we can ever be in the workforce development world. So what does it actually mean to work with the employer customer? So it's RJRW gives us a way to really work with the employer to figure out, okay, what are your needs, but also how can we better manage this relationship, better match you up with job seekers in our community.
So, and that's about both recruitment, so bringing in new workers, and then retention of existing workers, right? So one way we talk about that is talking about quality jobs. Why is a focus on quality jobs important?
Humanity.
Okay.
So you have labor, right? And, it is inextricably linked to human beings.
Right.
So if you're talking about a job, you really need to have a work opportunity that considers somebody's full humanity, or at least, fuller than we're used to.
Right. Well, what are some of the components of a good job? And I know that to some degree that's still evolving and an ongoing discussion, but what are some things that have been identified as components of a quality job?
So I really like the National Fund for Workforce Solutions framework around this. They have, 4 pillars of, what makes up a good job. And it's essentially 4 categories, not necessarily a single pillar for each, but you have your core things like, can you really have a good job if the wages are low? Chances are no.
Right.
Can you really have a good job if it's a dangerous workplace? Chances are no. But also, you have the other 3 pillars. So around support, you have training opportunities and career advancement. You have this idea of like having mentoring and coaching available to staff at a workplace, either through peers or sponsors who are higher up. And then lastly, you have this idea of worker voice or worker power. And again, getting back to the idea that a workforce relationship has 2 entities involved, the worker and the employer. So making sure that both of those entities are well heard and feel relevant in that relationship.
Interesting. So employers have had a way of doing business, of hiring and maintaining a workforce. And I guess at some point recently, or maybe not, maybe this has been ongoing, but it's started to break or not function the way they were used to. I guess part of that was around COVID, when people were staying home from work and experiencing life in a different way. And then as they came back to work, perhaps they didn't feel as good about their jobs or recognized that they weren't meeting their needs. How do we help employers change their way of interacting? You know, you mentioned worker voice, for instance. How do we help them to find a pathway to capturing worker voice, for instance?
Oh, that's the big question, Mike. How do we do that? How might we best do that? As a workforce intermediary, or as staff to a workforce intermediary like we are, I think that's a really tricky line for us to be walking. Like I said before, employers are experts in their own industries. So there's no way we're ever going to be able to say, well, if you change your operations by doing ABC, that's the key to accessing worker voice, or really being able to lift up your workforce in a way that's going to be beneficial for everyone, right?
Right.
So what does it actually look like for KentuckianaWorks to be in that space? I think it really boils down to making resources available. So whether it's technical assistance that we post on our website, or make available to employers who are engaging with us on specific grants, or maybe it's something like making sure our service providers understand that worker voice is just as important as employer preferences in that job matching conversation. And it's also around building a strong network of partners who understand that we need to right size the role of work in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and everything that takes to get to work. So if we're thinking about scheduling that's just all over the place and not really letting
Sure.
somebody live their life, if it was more predictable, even if it was still flexible, that's one thing. But if you have somebody who has to work opening and no, I said the wrong way, closing and then opening shifts at a restaurant, then that's no real way to make sure you're getting the highest level of productivity out of that person, nor for that person to really be able to have a really engaged life outside of work either.
Right. So I know a big part of what's in front of us still is, and what's being talked about at a national level, is measuring and collecting data on quality jobs. And I know the Gallup folks are or have captured data around the cost of disengagement. So there is a real cost affiliated with losing employees who have been trained and invested in. So I know those are all conversations that are happening here at KentuckianaWorks, and brainstorming about how we can start A, defining quality jobs, and B, measuring and collecting data around quality jobs. So that's all in front of us still. But if people want to learn more, if employers want to get involved in retention, recruitment, and around a racial equity lens, around the quality job lens, what's the best way for them to get engaged?
Oh, wow. So I feel like there's small scale engagement and large scale engagement on that, right? So maybe the easiest first step is just ask your employees, like, what's working for them, what's not working for them. Create a space where they feel comfortable giving candid answers. And that's, if you don't have that kind of workplace right now, it's not going to happen overnight. So just be prepared that it's going to be a bit of a long haul before you get to those candid answers. But there's also that large scale engagement. So you mentioned racial equity. We are dealing with decades and decades of public workforce policy that has reinforced some pretty serious racial inequities and gender inequities for that matter in a lot of roles. So really coming to terms with what that has done to our collective psyche around work. If you're thinking about unions, especially in the construction trades, historically there has been a tradition of shutting people of color out of those union jobs, right? So unions are doing much better than they have been around that particular topic. But if we think about all of this, generational trauma that has been built up through the years around work and access to a quality job and who has that access, and how with whatever quota is in place around who can get into jobs and when and where, there's a lot we need to work through. So being really willing to own, each of us being able to own our part in that history, and acting accordingly, like being humble about what progress there is to be made, who might have answers that we haven't considered before, and really just be willing to turn things on their head.
Excellent. Well, of course, if employers want to get in touch with KentuckianaWorks to help have these conversations and participate in some of the sector groups and other activities we have going on, they can, of course, go to KentuckianaWorks.org, and they can also find your name and my name with our email addresses there, and we encourage people to reach out for more information. I thank you for your time today, Aleece.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All righty. Have a good one.
Thanks for tuning in to KW Conversations. Visit KentuckianaWorks.org to find labor market data, resources for job seekers and employers, and much more.